Greetings, chromatic warriors! Every night I go to sleep and I have the same dream. How can I demonstrate 3 techniques for blending? So here we go. I'll be laying out 3 of my techniques. These are interchangeable, as you'll see through the demonstrations. I've found these are just various ways that I've started pushing the paint around by instinct from just painting and playing with it, but I'm here to share some of that knowledge with you. So please enjoy these techniques 3. Hello friends, welcome to my palette. The first thing I want to dial in on is dilution. So normally I just use water, but today is special. So I have 50-50 distilled water mixed with 50-50 liquid retardant. So I'm making a little puddle over here, it may be hard to see. Take a small amount of paint, combining this to about a 50-50 consistency, but what I'm going to show you is that your category of success is wider than you may think for dilution. Also, just notice the size of the brush I'm using. A larger brush gives you more control, but that effect is scalable. A larger brush will help you out though. Start large, then work down to small. Here I have a piece of plain plastic card. I've just primed it with black and then painted over with black acrylic. You can see that dilution, that mixture on my brush, and ordinarily you should be able to place your brush down, sweep it towards where your highlight is going to end up being, get a smooth kind of gradiated brush stroke leading up to that. You can see this little puddle at the tip right here. The thing is, I have too much of this mixture on my brush right now. But as you can see, if I get a little obsessive about it, just keep laying down paint gradually, I have less of that mixture and I'm gaining more control over that. So let me clean my brush out. I think the climate of the brush is also important. Some people approach with too much water on their brush and they're adding dilution to an already diluted mixture. So you see I'm just rolling it over and it has the characteristics. I would describe this as a sponge that has been squeezed intensely under a tight fist. So now my challenge to you is to take a small amount of that dilution. I'm trying to target an amount that's closer to my result down here. That same dilution, just taking the tiniest amount that you think won't have an effect. Look at that. There's also something going on here where the tip of the brush has paint on it, the belly of the brush does not. And there are certain brush strokes I make where they touch down at the same time, and you can see what a smooth edge that gives me. I am also using yellow over black to really expose what a single layer looks like. It is the accumulation of many thin diluted layers that will give you a gradiated result, but I think this helps to expose it in just its rawness. You need to know that the first layer is going to look bad. It almost doesn't look yellow. I think it's dry though. My paint is still wet on my brush because I have moisture still in the belly of my brush. You can see how that gradual accumulation is taking place. For this next approach, let's say I'm trying to accomplish just that, laying down these smooth swipes, but I have too much of that mixture on my brush. You can see me swiping it off on the paper towel behind the card, and look, I can go back in while the paint is still wet. That retardant is helping to extend the drying time. You will become faster. I've used the retardant because I'm speaking over this. You will not need it as you go, but if it helps you in the beginning, gives you more time to go back and control the paint. Also practice this, laying it down, cleaning the brush out, and sponging up that rough edge. Now this is also not the healthiest approach. I could instead lick my brush. Alright, that's where the brush licking comes into play. You can pull it off with a paper towel, it's slightly damp, or you can just put it in your mouth. You don't want to eat too much paint, but there are many ways to achieve a smooth blend. Now this final technique, this is called feathering. I'm taking a tiny bead of undiluted paint on the end of my brush. It still has that same sponge-like characteristic. I've drawn an arrow here just so I have a direction to go in. You know, sometimes you're painting on a flat space, it doesn't really have a light source. We'll get to the miniature. But you see how I'm able to take just a small bead of paint, an amount that you think won't have an effect, laying it down, sweeping towards my target but moving away, and able to kind of lay a small bead of paint down and stretch it to a transparent consistency, just from the benefit of that small amount of moisture in my brush. When I'm painting, all of these techniques will come into play, combinations of the three, but this is how I am controlling the paint. So let's take those techniques and apply them to a model. Same qualities on the brush, but I'm using a much smaller brush because of the surface area that I'm working with, and I have a slightly diluted amount of paint. First of all, I wanted to capture this particular stage in the highlighting because I have a shadow, a mid-tone, and now I'm adding a brighter yellow. I'm adding demonic yellow on top of this fiendish yellow. And I'm starting to work in these smaller portions. So I wanted to capture some of the brush play and just how you can now see, you know, the way I'm treating the paint and just instinctively going back to those three techniques that have been demonstrated. Like so far I've just been diluting and also using feathering, sweeping towards the wrist. Yeah, you see I'm taking a small diluted amount because I'm working in such a fine, a small area. I want these highlights to be smooth. Just placing that small dot, just like in the feathering demonstration, sweeping, you know, away but towards that target. So all of my brush strokes are conforming in the same direction. You want to consider that every brush stroke you make is creating a texture. So if I tear it back and forth, the layers that will fall on top of that texture may not be as smooth. So if I'm always guiding and tossing things in the same direction, it's very tight and fine work. So I feel like sometimes it's hard to see exactly, which is why I wanted to use that plastic card in the beginning to demonstrate. Right here I'm going to lick the brush, just go back, sponge that edge up. It's kind of an if this then this situation. You know, it's very touch and go whether I'm going to alternate through these techniques or not. Generally I'm able to just lay down a very small amount of paint, stretch it out to a transparent end. That's where I've been at lately. But I still have to come back to the classics. I still have to come back and dilute or have to erase and pick up some of my mistake here and there. But I thought it would be good information to be capturing the slow build of one of these blends. You know, I have a lot more work to do along on this night, and a lot of the time I do a lot of work off camera. You know, I'll paint a leg and then paint the other leg. But just wanted to talk you through the slow progression. See how much time it takes, how many layers are going into it. The more diluted layers I add, the smoother it's going to become. You can see on the chest, it's still a little patchy. You know, the boundary between the mid and highlight tone is a little murky. Things can always move slightly. It's okay. Just need to bring more layers onto it and just keep saturating. So always sweeping in that same direction. Even if I happen to throw a puddle of paint down, I'll be sure to go in and pick it back up and, you know, whip everything up into the same direction again. There, now the chest is starting to smooth out. Many thin layers, and I would say give it at least 3 layers before you decide it's not working for you. Obviously with familiarity you'll get much better at knowing how much paint to put on your brush relative to the area that you're trying to cover. That's an instinct that needs to be developed, as well as the varying density of the paint. You can see me adding edge highlights in there. In that case I'm taking from just the pure puddle of paint because it doesn't need to be so diluted. And then other areas, pulling a little paint off to the side, mixing my dilution additive into it, just slowly slicking things out. Don't worry, Chromatic Warrior, I've heard your thoughts. Dear Horse Lord, what if my blends don't look smooth? Well, sometimes you don't want them to be. Look at this man's butt. I'm going in here with some diluted leather brown, just over a mixture of black and leather brown. And even with a little bit of dilution involved, a little directionality in mind, I can create a leathery texture. I don't always want things to be smooth, but I still get a nice variation in the saturation as it grows. It can carry some texture. Now I've brightened things up by just adding a little skeleton bone into that leather brown. You see even kind of a stippled approach, depending on the material you're trying to render. Sure, I'm doing a leathered ass right now, but this could be some hand-pounded steel at some point. Look at your mistakes and ask yourself, what does this look like instead, or how can I apply this in a way that makes narrative sense? So I just have to lie to yourself a little bit about textures. And we'll cap that off with just some very fine diluted dots. Those small diluted puddles overlap each other nicely and create little variations. Very pleasing look. And thus concludes the ceremony. Thank you for coming along with me as we add to this tome of knowledge. I like to create these videos that I can refer back to every great now and again, just holding a single technique within them. Certainly I use these techniques on models, but sometimes I like to lay them raw just for information's sake. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know how you feel in the comment section down below. Feel free to ask for tutorials that you would like to see. I'm happy to hear from you, especially as the people who support me on this Patreon. So until we meet again, my friend, remain unchained.